Highgate Cemetery is said to be one of the most haunted places in the whole of London, and with good reason. In the early 1800s, the city's population topped the 1 million mark, and despite a high death rate, it was still growing rapidly. Graves were squeezed in between shops and crammed outside taverns. Undertakers dressed up as men of the cloth to perform illegal ceremonies. Many people were buried in shallow, partially dug graves and quickly covered up with lime. The stench and disease were horrific. Something needed to be done. The Parliament demanded for 7 new private cemeteries to be built. These cemeteries were to open in the countryside around the capital. Highgate Cemetery opened in 1839 and was located west of Swains Lane on the former Ashurst estate. The main gate still remains today. Rights of burial were sold for either a limited period or perpetuity. Soon, Highgate Cemetery became a fashionable place to bury one's loved ones. The Victorian attitude towards death and its presentation led to the creation of beautiful Gothic tombs and buildings. Buildings such as the Egyptian Avenue, an impressive structure consisting of 16 vaults, each containing 12 coffins on either side. Just about as impressive is the Circle of Lebanon. The circle was created using the earth which belonged to the ancient cedar of a Lebanon tree, which once stood in the garden of the former Ashurst estate. The circle consists of 36 vaults, and finally there are terrace catacombs. These catacombs have an impressive frontage and room for about 825 bodies in 55 vaults, with room for 15 coffins in each. By the turn of the 20th century, the cemetery's fortunes waned. World War I decimated the staff, and by the end of World War II, the cemetery had all but been abandoned. In 1960, the gates to Highgate Cemetery were closed. Pristine landscaping became lush jungles, and buildings tumbled in upon themselves. Rumours about men in long robes meeting and holding dark rituals among the ruins of the cemetery were also told. Ghosts are said to haunt the alleyways in the cemetery. The local newspaper, the Highgate Express in Hampstead, started receiving letters from frightened individuals who went through various ghostly encounters. One man wrote, his car was broken down near the cemetery, and he was terrified to have seen an apparition with red eyes glaring at him through the cemetery gates. Another man who was walking down Swains Lane was knocked on the ground by a creature that seemed to glide from the walls of the cemetery. The gruesome creature just dissolved into thin air when an approaching car shone its headlights on the man. There is also a story of a ghostly cyclist who was working his way up a steep incline when frightening a young mother almost out of her wits. But perhaps the most terrifying paranormal entity said to reside here is that of the Highgate vampire.
Well, talking of vampirism, everybody knows about the famous case of the so-called Highgate vampire. Indeed, it was me that inadvertently started the whole thing. What actually occurred there was that there were reports of a tall dark figure at Highgate Cemetery back in the late 60s. And I interviewed person, and other people actually interviewed, people that claimed to have seen a tall dark figure. There was one witness who was an accountant actually, and he got lost right in the middle of in Highgate Cemetery, near the Circle of Lebanon, which is a big Victorian circle of catacombs And he told me that all of a sudden he sensed something behind him. He said he didn't know what it was. It was just an overwhelming sensation. There's somebody there. And he swung around and he told me that he saw a tall figure actually standing about 6 feet away from the cemetery. It wasn't dark, it was getting dark. And he described the eyes. He said it had hypnotic eyes. He felt as if it was trying to drain of energy to hypnotise him. And it happened so quickly, he was frightened. But when he started to get frightened, the figure had already disappeared.
The vampire was said to be a medieval nobleman who practiced black magic in Romania. His coffin was brought from Europe to England in the 18th century, and his cult-like followers brought him a house in the West End. He was buried at the site that eventually became Highgate Cemetery. He slumbered peacefully until, according to reports, Satanists performed a ritual at the cemetery that is believed to have caused his evil spirit some unrest. A Highgate vampire is said to be a very tall, dark figure that glides through the cemetery. His presence is frequently announced by a sudden drop in temperature. He has also caused clocks and watches to stop. He terrifies all the animals in his vicinity and has been blamed for scores of dead foxes on the cemetery grounds. The Highgate vampire is said to have a hypnotic stare and a bone-chilling effect on all who have encountered him, especially those foolish enough to spend the night in the cemetery.
I was passing the top gate of Highgate Cemetery. I don't know what time it would have. It would have been approaching midnight. It was very late. And as I passed the top gate to go down Swans Lane, something caught my eye and I looked up really quickly. I don't know what it was. It certainly was not a vampire, but it certainly was some concrete sort of psychic entity. In other words, I had witnessed what other people already reported. I did notice another thing, which is often the case actually with psychic phenomena. The area turned icy cold. I did see 2 points of light, which I took to be its eyes, and I definitely felt I was being drained of energy, and I knew I'd encountered something psychic, which was quite alarming. And all of a sudden, it just wasn't there, and the temperature returned to normal again. Following this, I decided to conduct a psychic seance in Highgate Cemetery using a medium. There were a small group of us. We made our way to an area near the Circle of Lebanon, and we started preparations for the ceremony. And the idea was to cast a circle on the ground where the entity would appear, to summon it up by using the element of fire, and the medium would stand in a smaller circle for her own protection and to make communication. And we were just preparing for the ceremony when we heard voices and lights in the background. And it didn't take much to realise that it was the police. Now, they'd been keeping an eye on Highgate Cemetery because of all the vandalism there. They were coming in to Highgate Cemetery, and I was actually arrested.
Other strange phenomena occurring here is heart-stopping banshee wails, spectral faces that float around the place, and the floating ghost of a nun. Some spirits are such regular visitors to Highgate Cemetery that the locals have named them.